Yeah, perfect. All right, perfect. Let's start. Good. Well, wherever you are, good morning, afternoon, good evening, to everybody who joined here. Thanks for thanks for jumping on onto the call here. I'm Thilo. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Vaultree, data and user encryption company. It's a pleasure to have you all here for what promises to be an exciting, insightful, and informing session exploring encrypted data sharing, and the current challenges and the future of it, especially for industries like healthcare, finance, legal, anywhere really where data privacy and compliance are critical, but also business operations and productivity are important. So what you learned today throughout this next hour is what current challenges exist in the realm of data sharing, how encrypted data sharing could offer a solution that not just addresses the privacy and security concerns, but also focuses on the actual business operations and anything that's involved with it. We have industry experts here with us who would like to provide their own perspective on it, and also discuss some real world examples with you or with us, and we'll also show a tiny live demo in form of a GIF, how encrypted data sharing would work, and can then jump into questions and answers at the end of the session. We have pinned a link to a Google form, an anonymous Google form, at the top of the chat here. So if you enter that chat, you're going to see that. You can ask questions throughout the webinar. And since we're not going to have time for all of the questions, we're going to, choose the top questions to answer at the end of this webinar. Going over to the speakers, basically, the introduction here. I would like to welcome David Curry, Mary Gardner, and J.R. Teetsort. Welcome. Thanks for jumping on board and sharing your perspectives with us. I would like to hand over to each of you in this order here on the screen for you to introduce yourselves first to the audience.
Amazing. Thanks, Thilo, and thanks to the Vaultree team for the kind invite to speak. I'm David Curry. By profession, I've been a cybersecurity professional since the late 90s. I've started my career in cryptography, and then kind of moved into different roles for the last 10 years. Being in CISO roles, most recently with Klarna. I was in Nubank in Brazil for 3 years. And I was with the Hong Kong Stock Exchange for 7 years. And prior to that, I spent 5 years in the UK, part of that time with Barclays Bank, leading cryptography for the bank globally, and also with Visa. Super excited to be in this conversation. Honestly, I'd love to share my kind of real world experience, the pain points, both on a professional level, because this has been something that's been, a problem to solve as long as I've been kind of a professional in cybersecurity, but also some kind of personal kind of elements to this as well, and why I kind of relate to what Vaultree is trying to solve. So, thanks very much for the invite, Thilo.
Thank you, David. I'm Mary Gardner. I've been in the industry. I've been a cybersecurity leader for the last 20 years. I've worked across multiple industries, mainly healthcare and finance. And like Dave, I have seen challenges and chased the dream of encryption and workable encryption across multiple industries, and keep getting disappointed. So it's nice to see an organization like Vaultree actually work on usable and thorough encryption that can work in a non-encrypted, a non-cryptography workspace, because it has to be easy to use if you're going to put it in a healthcare space. JR?
Thanks, Brian, and thanks, Thilo, for the invite. My name is J.R. Teetsort. I also have been in this industry for a few decades. I built and led the cybersecurity program at Micron Technology for a number of years. I've done a CISO gig at Darktrace, and now I am at a company called Aura. So I've seen a lot of challenges from scale, from very large multinational organizations down to late-stage startups. And while the problem is perhaps different from one scale to another, there's really similar challenges with how do you enable this kind of capability to a large group of staff, maybe some folks who aren't as skilled as others in the space of cryptography. So my my approach at this is more from a practitioner, and how do I enable an organization to take on this kind of capability. So I'm happy to join the conversation.
Awesome. Thanks to you three. Super interested in what you're going to have to say in the individual sections. So what we're going to do is we're going to dive first into the current state of data sharing and its challenges, and would love to hand over to you three as well to kind of discuss what challenges you have come across over the years. After that, dive into what it actually is and why it matters, encrypted data sharing. And then going into some real world use cases that we can discuss then together and see how this is applicable, how it would actually help you with the challenges that you encountered or are still encountering. And then we can show that little demo basically before answering some questions. So jumping into the first section here, and the next slide there. Thanks, James, for helping. We have a lot of limitations in the current landscape of data sharing, right? And we just have three sectors here as examples because they're simply very highly regulated and they have a lot of data sharing happening. So just highlighting those basically. It's important to understand that they have been relying up to today on outdated methods to collaborate and share and analyze data. And while some of these solutions, for example, tokenization, data masking, and even secure multi-party computation, offer a degree and even a high degree of security, they fall short of several critical areas, right? And one of these critical areas where data is constantly being shared, basically, is that usability of data and also efficiency is always sacrificed. Sorry, is the security sacrificed for these, right? But it doesn't have to be that way, right? So important is to mention that any time that data is at rest or in transit, security is not really a big issue, at least not most of the times. But when it's actively being used or being analyzed, security is oftentimes compromised, and this is what encrypted data sharing in this case is supposed to solve. Now, the risk of this exposure of data, of course, becomes critical when multiple entities, not just within an organization, but multiple entities, even across borders or often across borders, with differing compliance regulations, need to collaborate in real time. The traditional methods force organizations to make a difficult choice between either, maintaining data security and fully utilizing the data for decision making and for highly critical data analysis to bring actually the business forward. So that trade-off between privacy and efficiency is something which is extremely challenging for industries with strict regulations like GDPR, HIPAA, or LGPD, for example, in Brazil, etc., because you have to balance that compliance and operational effectiveness, that trade-off, right? So what I would like to hear is from you three, and just feel free to speak up here, Mary, David, and JR, what challenges you have come across in the past, what limitations you've come across in your specific industries. Feel free to give specific examples if you can. That'd be super interesting. And James, I think we can just stop sharing for a while so that people can see the three and a little bit bigger. Thanks.
Amazing. I'm happy to kind of jump in on this one. Maybe if I can give a bit more context about my background. So over the course of my career, I've worked, I started in Australia, I moved to the UK, I moved to Hong Kong, I moved to Brazil, moved back to the UK. And in all of these types of roles, we had varying degrees of regulation, compliance, cross-border data challenges. And quite frankly, as a security professional, I always felt that we kind of made strides to address these issues, but we never really had the tools to completely solve the problem. And again, when I first met the Vaultree team, I think at the beginning in 2020, I outlined this, kind of like issue for me. This has been a problem for 20 years that I've been trying to solve, right? And it's not because we haven't been trying, we just haven't managed to finally get to, a state where we can, achieve the right level of security without trading off performance, efficiency, or other kind of means. It's always been, if or, but never being able to get our cake and eating it. So I think this is kind of where I see Vaultree evolving data sharing. So I started, deploying, SFTP, data, peer-to-peer data sharing networks, between banks and financial organizations and regulators 20 years ago. And that was good, but there was a number of challenges in terms of establishing the setup, authorization, identity management. There's a bunch of things that we had to get it up and running. And then once we did that, we also had the challenge that we handed over data. And once the data was outside of our borders, outside of our control, we lost control of that. And, we were relying upon third-party security. So kind of fast forward, we made great strides. I was at Visa, for a period of time. We made great strides with tokenization come out. I love tokenization when it was introduced. It really took the heat out of some of the payments infrastructure, taking away some of the kind of incentives for attackers. But at the same time, we didn't quite achieve, the outcome what we wanted, which is elements of the data encrypted, but we still have, parts of, the data still there and still present. So it was a great move forward. But again, like now's time for the next evolution. Me personally, I've been both, as a professional struggling with this problem for a long time. And, I've tried, probably like a lot of people on this call, most solutions out there. I've also been, directly impacted by data leakage events. Both, a number of years ago, I was in Brazil when the entire citizen database was leaked. Then I think we had 110 million records from the phone companies leaked. And by the end of the year, I think the attackers had more of a complete snapshot of my personal data than probably I did in one place anyway. A few years into this, I actually started having direct messages from attackers, who could identify who I was, where I lived, had my phone number, had my email addresses, both private and professional. And in some cases, I had, unhappy customers, threatening to come to my house. So I felt this on a personal level as well, like the need to solve this problem. And, there are ways to do this. So I think over the course of the last 20 years, we've definitely, as a profession, moved in the right direction. But there is a natural evolution that we need to go through. And I think the encrypted data sharing, multi-party, data sharing where we can, work on encrypted data without having to expose the underlying data is the next evolution.
Yeah, and I agree, Dave. I think from my perspective, especially working in healthcare and research, the power of data lies in the bigger data stores. And especially from a research perspective, it's critically important to get data from across the globe, which really makes it incumbent upon researchers to be able to share the data. And they get the data through the medical record. And in order to share the data with the researcher, you have to ensure that you're going to provide certain protections on that data when you pass it off to the research teams. That's one of the points that encrypted data sharing, I think, would really help with, is when you talk about legal and protective mechanisms, encryption, and especially encryption in use, is huge. If I can protect that data no matter where it lives and not share the fact that there's one sample of a 99-year-old man living in North Borneo who has this disease, because that's identifiable data. Even if I don't share his name or anything else, that there's probably only one 99-year-old man in North Borneo. So having that data encrypted and not being able to see the elements that would give that data away, but share the important bits. That's critical, and it would really enable data sharing, especially when we're talking about pediatric patients, who I think are really top in terms of protecting their data. And it's data that all of the medical centers really want to ensure is maintained in a confidential manner. The other thing is just speed to usage. So it really reduces the time to get the agreements in place. So that's kind of my thought from a research perspective.
So I've come at this from a slightly different angle. I think certainly there's risks and concerns with PII data, medical health data, and research data. I would also add trade secret data to the list here, especially from companies that are generating intellectual property. It's often a very expensive process. And the data scientists of those organizations clearly want to benefit from model development on those large data sets, where it's not necessarily a regulation problem, but it's still a security problem and a trade secret protection challenge. And so you have this this balance to walk in terms of data scientists that want access or need access to all of the data in order to derive better models. But as the organization, you want to be careful really about who you're granting all of that access to. So this is, I think, another area where, you know, inside the walls of an intellectual property company, there's benefits to be had if we can figure out how to get data and use encryption more broadly adopted and standardized.
Brilliant, awesome. No, thanks for elaborating a little bit on these cases and the challenges in the past. Explain your background. I think it's going to become a little bit more interesting as well when we go into like some more real world examples. And would love to like do that in a few minutes there. James, do you wanna share again? Because before that, would love to like exactly dive a little bit into like what encrypted data sharing actually is and why it matters for all industries. So here we go. We established that there's a lot of challenges, right, with data sharing. Now, encrypted data sharing is a solution of something that's new and is based on novel technologies, such as you can see here multi-key encryption, data and use encryption technologies, such as fully homomorphic encryption. And this is something where we also had a webinar on recently. So if you want to, you know, go on the Vaultree blog, as well, there's a recap and recording of the webinar that you can access. Fully homomorphic encryption is the holy grail of encryption, really allowing you to actively use that data in its encrypted form, and in most advanced cases without losing the performance aspect of that, which has been a huge issue the last decades, and why it hasn't been adopted widely in the industry. So that challenge is something that Vaultree, for example, tackled. So it remains encrypted. Data remains encrypted during active use. So it ensures privacy, ensures security at every step of the process. And that allows for organizations to securely collaborate on data sets together across borders, across entities, within the same organization as well, of course, and all of that in real time, right? So this is something that that has been an issue for a very long time. And all of this ensures, of course, that organizations are compliant, right? We discussed before that there are lots of regulatory issues in many industries. And this solution simplifies that process, right? Because you automatically adhere with data protection regulations and other legislation, basically, because you're keeping data safe, you're keeping it encrypted at all times. So what I would like to do now is ask you, again, you touched a little bit on it, you know, but like I would love to go into some real world use cases. So I'm just gonna open up, you know, a little bit. If you want to jump to the next slide there in different industries. No, go ahead, go back to sharing there, James. Sorry. So yeah, if we want to discuss a few real world use cases there with you. So like in healthcare, for example, I would love to hear you three as well, and what kind of doors are being opened with that encrypted data sharing solution. So again, it unlocks incredible growth opportunities, not just focuses on the compliance and security aspect, but actually is able to open doors for new types of in the healthcare sector, for example, new types of treatment, advanced research, basically, treatment coordination, and so on, development of new drugs, and so on, by allowing the real-time sharing of patient records. So like Mary, you touched on it before. Do you want to elaborate a little bit of like what's actually what's possible with that?
Yeah, so I was meeting with some friends who work at a local hospital, in a pediatric hospital. And one of the things we were talking about is the ability to have a foundational set of research for not only pediatric oncology, but also pediatric vaccines. And the broader this data set is, and the more people that can draw from it, the more quickly you can get the research done, especially if you're looking at some of the more recent techniques to find vaccines. So what they're trying to do is determine how they can get their institutions to contribute unstructured data from the medical record to this fundamental foundational data set that could be comprised of potentially pediatric data from across the US. And as we were talking about it, the only way we could really solve the problem to reduce the barrier for all of the institutions would be encrypted data sharing, because you have to protect the data across the organization. You have to make sure only the people authorized to view the unencrypted data can do that. And if you're assigning very discrete keys for usage, it's a fabulous solution. So I think that's kind of the pinnacle of what would help healthcare build solutions that could solve really large problems. Did that clarify anything or make it muddier?
No, absolutely. I think it's like absolutely fair points and super interesting what's possible. Dave, JR, do you wanna touch on that?
Yeah, I'd love to kind of, Mary and I were having kind of a conversation recently, where, I was involved in a project probably less than 10 years ago, and the project, I was very lucky to kind of have some time with a Turing Medal winner, Professor Yao, one of the Chinese computer scientists, and we had this idea of creating a data exchange, and the concept was, imagine we could have a platform by which biotech kind of researchers, or medical researchers could upload their research without exposing the kind of underlying data, but monetize that research to enable and to improve other kind of researchers work as well. And so this concept was very much what we're talking about here. How do we kind of provide that access to data without exposing the underlying kind of intellectual property in this space? And I think the concept was, unfortunately, like, we couldn't get the project off the ground, and it was really down to technical limitations as opposed to the feasibility in the kind of business case. And I think, again, like, when I saw kind of what Vaultree was trying to solve, this made a lot of sense, right? Because this is a great way where researchers could share data, whether they wanted to monetize it or not, and enrich kind of other research without providing or releasing kind of access to intellectual property. So I think it's a really unique kind of opportunity we have, both in the healthcare sector, and I think this kind of relates also to the financial sector as well. I've seen similar kind of like use cases where we have the need to kind of share this type of data in a very simplified and quick manner that doesn't require a lot of setup time. I mentioned kind of in the intro, a lot of the trade-offs sometimes we make in security is the time to get things in place, the time to get all parties signed up to it, the amount of effort involved. When we're trying to move very quickly, that's often when we have to make kind of risk trade-offs, right? So I think, I've seen this kind of use case over the last kind of 10 years at least. And, I spoke to Professor Yao about this, and I asked the question, why didn't he kind of make a move on this sooner? And it was down to compute power and the ability to kind of get this type of solution stood up. So again, like real world kind of examples where we could do something incredible sharing this type of data across borders without exposing underlying IP. and in some cases allowing kind of researchers to monetize it and see some kind of return on their time.
Yeah, super valid point. Thanks for touching on that as well. Another sector there, if you want to jump one ahead, is the financial sector, of course. Dave, you have a ton of experience in that space, and maybe I can hand over to you in terms of the challenges and also what it could solve. I mean, like, you know, finance is the no-brainer field, and everybody really has a touch point with that. Even we as consumers, basically, the healthcare space is equally important. But finance is something where we have, like, you know, daily touch points basically with it. So there's a ton of like risk involved, and critical transactions cross borders, etc. How does that help to innovate in the space?
Hey, look, I must say, like, I did a short stint in the healthcare sector, you know, kind of nearly 20 years ago. And, you know, I'd always been banking. And then I went to healthcare for a short stint and realized, you know, the type of job that Mary and other healthcare professionals, you know, working on cybersecurity have is like exceptional, because sometimes you're talking about life and death. You know, the ability to be able to share data across the hospital networks and have that have access securely, but without having to compromise kind of efficiency. It was a problem like back then, and it was something that, you know, we're trying to solve now. I think in the financial services, I mean, I could talk about this for hours, but, you know, things like I've always, you know, had models like, you know, where we've worked with credit bureaus. You know, I've always had this kind of challenge over the years where we needed to enable credit bureaus either directly access to our, you know, kind of customer data, or in some cases, you know, in most cases, we're shipping data to them for, you know, for use. So I think this is a great example of, again, wouldn't it be great if, you know, we could solve this problem where we can allow kind of, you know, third parties who play a very important role in, you know, kind of fraud and kind of credit management, the ability to interrogate data, but on a limited basis, right? We're never moving the data. We're able to kind of allow them to interrogate it, perform all the normal, you know, interactions they need with the data to provide credit decisions, but at the same time, never passing that data over. And, you know, we've seen breaches in this place. You know, again, anytime we're shipping large quantities of data, you know, outside of our bounds, you know, we're relying upon third-party security management. And, you know, in some cases, you know, the organizations, you know, financial institutions are sharing data with may not be spending the same amount of money on security. So again, like, you know, how do we actually, you know, solve this problem where we can make data accessible without having to ship it? Again, I've been in regulatory environments, and I'll give you two examples. One where we had to ship an entire customer database, not a Delta, but an entire customer database on a daily basis to a central regulator, but it had to go through a third party who was the only third party that worked in the space. And again, when you looked at their kind of investment in security versus ours, you know, it was, you know, very limited in some cases. But we had to use this third party in order to pass data to the regulator. So I think, again, this was another great use case where there was no reason we needed to ship this data. We could have, like, you know, make this data available real time for interrogation of the regulator. But again, we just didn't have the tools at the time. And the last one I'll leave you with, which is, again, like, I've always had personal experience in the space. You know, I was in Hong Kong, and at the time, you know, we stood up a mercantile exchange inside of China. And that brought me into scope for the China cybersecurity laws. And one of the kind of aspects of the China cybersecurity laws was the penalties around data breaches of China citizens, you know, where data is being shipped outside of China. In some cases, you know, could result in significant fines, and in some cases, me personally going to jail. So, you know, I was put in a situation where we needed to move staff data from China into, you know, kind of a central HR system outside of the China kind of zone. But at the same time, I had no real control over, you know, that kind of legislation and the enforcement of that, aside from, you know, if there was a data leak, and again, we were using third-party HR systems, that I potentially might end up in jail in China. So again, there's, like, you know, an element of, like, as a professional, you know, the need to find better solutions where we don't have to ship data across borders, but we can, again, interrogate it when we need to. JR, I don't know if you've got anything like to kind of add on from this bit.
No real financial sector experience for me, unfortunately.
All good. We have, like, yeah, go ahead.
I can toss something in real quick. So I did work in a financial institution in the early 2000s, and one of the things we had a problem with was fraud detection. And it was right about the time PCI was coming to the fore, and our internal auditors wanted us to, despite the fact that we were a card issuer, they wanted us to treat card data in line with PCI for merchants. So we were trying to use the analytics on something like 400 million transactions a day to, in an encrypted format, to find fraud, and it just wasn't performant. So we had to basically kludge together a solution where we hashed the data and just compared card information. So we had 5 elements that we hashed that weren't likely to change. But if we had had that information to query, it would have greatly improved our fraud prevention algorithms. And it would have been a solution that we didn't have to, jump through hoops to build ourselves. So that's my
Absolutely, and
one experience.
absolutely, I know it's going to facilitate a lot of things, and again, that trade-off, between security and productivity, and we're talking again 400 million a day, right? That's massive. You cannot sacrifice security, but you can also not sacrifice the the productivity with working on top of that data, right? Impossible.
Yeah.
If you want to jump to the next slide, we have one more sector just like highlighted here, but there's tons of other sectors, and we'd love to hear JR as well about other sectors as well, and his experience in the technology field. There's documents as well, right? In the legal sector, there's confidential documents, contracts, and other agreements, right? And personal documents as well, and they have to be shared. So encrypted data sharing is also enabling not just structured data sharing, but also unstructured data sharing, which is important for many different industries. And if you want to jump one more, we have government, we have education, supply chain, and other technology sectors basically that are massively impacted by that issue. And by allowing secure collaboration between those organizations in the same field or even cross field, say with a third party collaboration, basically that needs to access that data, but needs to comply to regulations, and these security issues exist for all of these. Encrypted data sharing would solve a massive problem by streamlining operations, enabling innovation in the space, and simplifying the whole process to expand partnerships and just create confidence with customers, etc. JR, do you want to add as well a few examples here?
Sure. I think for any of us that have worked in a multinational environment, we've touched and worked closely with the legal department, and in many cases outside counsel from various countries. Dave, I thought your example of setting up business in China was fascinating. I've had some experience as well with working on incidents across borders. So it took place in 2 or more countries, and then working through the legal process in each of those jurisdictions. And so you inevitably end up with legal in-house counsel, outside counsel. They need to exchange data. They need to exchange sensitive data, and as they're not technologists by trade generally. So I think any progress that we as an industry can make to make it more consumable for non-technologists to securely share data is a big step forward. And I'm not sure that we're there yet, but the improvements and advances along with of data and use encryption, I think, help us move that direction. The other experiences that I've had, I think, are similar to the research example in the healthcare fields, but in manufacturing or technology sectors, there's frequently use cases to share data up and down the supply chain, as well as after you exhaust model development analysis on your own data, you want to bring in data, certain data elements from your suppliers that might influence your own supply chain logistics planning. And then, of course, your customers want interesting data elements from you as well. And so there tends to be this desire to securely share data up and down. In the advancements of data lakes in that space, we start to get into really interesting ways where data sets can be shared, and sharing those strategically and in a way that the original author of the data can retain control. I think is really interesting in what a lot of firms are looking for in terms of benefiting and in some cases even monetizing data lakes that they own and create, but trying to extract additional value out of those in a secure fashion.
Absolutely, yeah, very interesting. Dave, Mary, anything to add here?
As I said, I could probably talk about this for hours, but there's so many real world examples for probably everyone on this call has. M&A was another great example. One of the challenges we always face, across business, security professionals wear the brunt of this, but it's across businesses when we're in an M&A situation and we need to move quickly. And at best, I've been in those situations where we've had not days, sometimes hours to kind of execute certain pieces of work as part of the deal. And we may have secure deal rooms, we may have kind of secure environments, or at worst we're trading files over email that are password protected, right? Again, this is another example of where we have very complex multi-party arrangements that need to be able to share data real time and be able to kind of manipulate data, but at the end the deal, specifically if the deal doesn't go through, being able to, kind of restrict access to that data, and never allowing the underlying data to move. Again, lots of kind of real world examples where we can kind of see where we can solve this problem, specifically when we've got lots of kind of external parties involved in complex transactions.
Absolutely.
It would be interesting to test the idea. There's a lot of information sharing among security professionals, and a lot of it's stalled because people don't want to send their sensitive data to big reservoirs and have it potentially identified. So this could be an interesting use case for encrypted data sharing to better enable us to start predicting the larger attacks. I don't know, JR, what are your thoughts on that?
I think you're right on track. Threat intel sharing has been a panacea for a long time, and there's been multiple approaches of it. The challenge has always been, especially when sharing or trying to share data with government, is you run into classification scenarios where lots of firms can't have all of the data elements. If there was a secure way to do that without exposing tactics and sources, I think it could open up a lot better threat intel sharing from the government to other private party sectors. I find that very interesting as something that I've tried to work within in the past.
Brilliant. Fantastic insights. Would love to hear more, but running out of time slowly, so let's move on to the next section. There's still one more we can discuss, kind of like the future and different application scenarios outside of even encrypted data sharing. So it's not really a live demo, it's more of an animation that we put together just to like visualize a little bit, in terms of like how it works. So if you want to start the video there quickly. So we have an animation showing two data sets, right? And two data owners. So we have a concept of like an orange team on the left, blue team on the right. Both teams have data they want to share in order to gain insights or run analytics. But due to policy, law, regulation, they cannot share the data in plain text, right? It's not allowed. So what in this case, encrypted data sharing, and also in the specific case, Vaultree encrypted data sharing, VEDS, does it is it allows users to encrypt their data individually, right, with their own key. Orange team with the orange key, blue team with the blue key. the red team cannot decrypt the blue team's data, and the blue team cannot decrypt the orange team's data, right? So the magic that comes in here now with VEDS is that you can combine the orange and the blue into one data set, represented here by the two blue and orange cogs here. This new database is fully encrypted. It requires cooperation from both orange and blue to decrypt. So the new data can be queries, can be encrypted results. They can be decrypted through a joint decryption process. So the end result is plain text, and only the results of the query are ever decrypted, nothing else. That happens through a partial decryption process. So if the orange team writes a query, then VEDS will take the fully encrypted results and send them to the blue team for partial decryption inside the blue environment. Then the partially decrypted but still fully secure data goes from the blue team to the orange team, and the orange team finishes the decryption and ends up with the plain text results. So like this, the keys never actually move outside of the secure environment, and no data is ever exposed through the data query, the retrieval, or the decryption process. So that's the magic behind it, basically, and works in practice. And when we jump to the next section here, because that goes hand in hand, the future of data sharing, actually, it enables a lot of different things, right? So what does the future hold? If you want to jump to the next slide there, I wanted to discuss that with you here. Like, what does it hold? We have lots of different application scenarios, right? So like, besides the advanced secure collaboration and analysis technologies that could evolve from this, there's lots of application scenarios and different privacy preserving AI cases and machine learning as well, right? So like Vaultree is also working on, that's a different one, a different topic. There's encrypted machine learning efforts, for example, that go into that direction that professionals could also use to analyze data, basically predictive analysis, etc. We're going to have a separate webinar on that, because that's a whole new innovative topic, basically. There's lots of application scenarios, lots of use cases. So if the three of you could think of something about the future vision, basically, thinking ahead, like what this could enable in the future, would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, my simplistic goal would be that data scientists and model developers could be able to perform their job without needing access to the plain text data on the back end. Like, I think that's the dream from a CISO perspective. How realistic that is or not, I think still needs to be proven out.
I'll second JR's comments. The less we have to encrypt data, and the less we have to see data in plain text, I think the more ability we're going to have to really utilize the data to its fullest.
I think for me, like, I talked about a lot of examples of data, leaving environments where, I'd love to see, kind of the world in the future where, I've got the ability, to remove transferring data outside the organization, have the methods to be able to, through very kind of fine-grained control, allow, external entities very easily, to be able to interrogate data without having to kind of ship it. And something that, not just within region, but across, kind of borders globally, is a scalable solution. Again, I talked about the beginning where I've been forever trading off security with, usability, efficiency, and vice versa. A lot of times under time pressure, I'd love to be in a, I see the future where we have this type of platform, that is very agnostic to the type of use case. It's just something that we can enable for, organizations to use, and very simple to allow, external entities in. But I think on the inside, again, the future would be great where, I've been in fast moving startups that are trying to scale, and, features of these companies are allowing, kind of engineers and data scientists a lot of access to a lot of data all the time. But then as they kind of grow and become more interesting targets, we need to change that kind of culture. Wouldn't it be great if we could actually have, the ability to maintain and allow them access to this type of data, but then over time, depending on how the organization evolves and compliance, that's overlaid to the organization, is implemented, we could just change the policies, build these kind of like segregation around data sets without having to really culturally shift the organization. And again, like from a threat actor perspective, how amazing, like, if you are compromised, that it's useless. Okay, you're in, but you're not going to be able to do anything. A bit like where we moved to with tokenization, it kind of, really disincentivize attackers going after certain assets. Again, imagine we could do this on a much wider scale where, yes, you may breach the perimeter, but, once you're kind of in the door, there's not much use you can get out of this data set. So I think there's, I'd love to see, both internally how data is used in organizations, that additional level of control, as well as, removing these kind of barriers for, working with third parties.
Brilliant. Does anybody want to touch on that point? Okay, perfect. I think we can move to our last section, which would be the Q&As. We've received a few questions there via the form, and yeah, perfect. And there's one here, for example, directed at CISO. So as a CISO, you're constantly balancing security with business operations. How do you see encrypted data sharing impacting this balance, especially when working with sensitive or confidential data? So I think we touched on a little bit before, but I think especially when we think about larger data sets, etc., and the productivity issue, how do you balance these?
Well, I think as a CISO, as an internal, operations team, you're always, I think, dealing with not only what access does this person claim to need today, but what data have they made a copy of while they have access to it, and where is that data going? And so that quickly becomes this viral spread of, can they transfer the data to their workstation? And if so, could they transfer the data off of their workstation to something else? And there's a lot of just operations, time, energy, and expense in not only trying to understand, but put guardrails around an operating environment to keep the data where you intended it to be. And so, again, in a perfect world going forward, and all of that data that the engineer is working on is encrypted, I don't have to think as hard about follow-on copies of that data if it's not able to be decrypted. And so it's kind of tying back to Dave's last comment on malicious actors, but it applies to insiders as well. Even, I would say, non-malicious accidental copies of data, or left the back door open, or these other just human nature accidents that happen. But the risk of those happening to a plain text data set are just monumental in some cases.
Yeah, JR, I really relate to that. And I think the insider threat is an interesting one, that CISOs have to really, security professionals in general have to really kind of, deal with. I've been in organizations where they've had, very strong feelings about how much we trust our staff. But again, over time and as, organizations scale, the kind of chances of you introduce kind of someone with bad intent into the organization, will present itself. And therefore, this kind of insider threat, is always it becomes somewhat of, philosophical debate around, like, how much do we trust the staff? Where do we want to draw the lines? How do we actually build these kind of like internal walls without breaking culture of organizations in the process? And again, a bit like the example I gave about kind of fast moving kind of startups and how the culture needs to evolve over time, especially in financial services. I've worked in organizations where, Nubank was a great example, pre-IPO, as a private company, very different to post-IPO. And that was part of my kind of mission there, was to help them, to prepare them. But a lot of what, I was there to do was really around cultural shift and, trying to explain to, engineers and data scientists and people who had a lot of access to data beforehand to kind of move quickly. Now we need to be a bit more kind of precise around how we lock data down without breaking the way that they kind of operated. So yeah, JR, I really relate to that.
I relate to that too. I think ultimately people want to do their jobs. I unfortunately am seen as a barrier to people doing their jobs. I create longer passwords. I deploy MFA. I throw up all these things that make people's jobs harder. I think encrypted data sharing is a way to make their jobs easier because they don't have, it's not something else that they have to interact with in a different way. And it provides me tools on the back end to manage access and really query access and understand who's doing what. So, 90%, 99% of people will do the right thing unless you throw a barrier up. And for those 1% that don't do the right thing, this type of tool will enable me to find them more easily. So.
It's an interesting point, Mary. I've been involved in so many kind of investigations of staff hacking organizations where actually they were trying to do the right thing, but they would take shortcuts because the barriers that were placed in front of them were just too prohibitive to them doing their job at the end of the day. And so humans being humans, we find a shortcut. We're always going to try and, get things done. And unfortunately, sometimes, folks will kind of cross the line doing that. But yeah, very interesting how this could help solve some of that. I'd love to never be in those conversations anymore.
Me too.
Perfect. I think like within or that these contributions you've asked already. So you answered already another question about insider threats and accidental data exposure. So that we can just have one more question here before we come to an end, which is: have you come across different solutions, competitive solutions to encrypted data sharing for these issues, and how do they differentiate from it? I think we touched on a few topics, how it was solved in the past, basically, in terms of tokenization, masking, SMPC, etc. But is there something specific maybe that you can think of?
Well, I mean, there's always great examples of, we're shipping data around organizations or outside of organizations. And, the amount of times I've investigated data leakage events, down to folks, fat finger moments, I accidentally sent something, outside our organization and I was doing it because it was time sensitive. I have to get this done now. And I've inadvertently kind of created a data leakage event because, this is the fastest method for sharing data. Again, if we remove the need for folks sharing data and actually place the data in a location which they could just enable, or there was policy kind of like in place to enable kind of access where you didn't have to rely upon individuals, but you could do this kind of essentially, again, you take away a lot of that risk around accidental data leakage events. Again, something that most of us have probably come across in our careers and incredibly frustrated by.
Yeah, other approaches, have been, database encryption, and that gets really challenging. Individual file encryption, and then you end up having to build in, and deploy endpoint agents then to encrypt and unencrypted files. And these are all solutions that do encrypt data, but not necessarily give you data in use encryption. And on top of that, they get much more painful to manage from an IT and support operations perspective.
I think all of the other solutions I don't think we'd be having this conversation if the other solutions out there solve the problem. Right? There's holes in each one. A database encryption, I have to give the keys to the administrator, which potentially exacerbates insider threat. If I want, and honestly, database encryption just protects me if somebody, pulls a truck up to the data center and takes the machine, right? So I don't think anything's viable. I think some have been more elegant than others, and there's progressions, but there's not one that works well for data sharing that I've seen.
Brilliant. Perfect. And if that is not perfect timing, I don't know what is. Coming to an end here. So just a few closing words here. So we've covered the challenges of data sharing and analysis, what it actually is, why it matters, what the future is going to look like. We discussed a few real world scenarios, seeing a little animation basically. So lots of stuff that we covered, which is transforming data sharing, and will continue to transform data sharing and analysis in the future. For the audience, thank you very much for joining. Keep up to date. Like we have, again, via our blog, you can find lots of information on the website as well. Follow us on LinkedIn. Keep up to date with the developments. We have lots of cool stuff coming up as well. Releases also in the space of encrypted machine learning. So stay tuned. And then to our three speakers, thank you very much from the bottom of the whole Vaultree team's heart, basically, for joining here and discussing with us the challenges and also the solutions around data sharing. So heartfelt thank you to the three of you. And that leaves me just with saying goodbye and see you next time.
Thanks, Thilo. See you, folks.
Thanks, Tilo.
Thank you.